Hey, IOSTEX here, #1 private Overwatch coach over on iostex.com and former head coach for organizations such as NYXL and the Boston Uprising. The feeling is all too common if you solo queue on a regular basis. You hop into a game and it feels like no matter what you do, teammates are dying around you. You're getting no heals, your tank isn't pushing in, and you have no space to work with. It's easy to say team diff in chat and go next. However, that thinking is not going to help you climb in the long run. So in this video, I'd like to explain what causes this feeling of having to 1v5 every game and what we can do to improve the situation. The first fact we have to understand is that when we solo queue for a match of Ranked, the game tries to match us into a game that we are expected to win 50% of the time. This makes sense. Imagine a game where some players play 100 games and only win 10 of them. Those players would quit the game very quickly, StarCraft 2, which for a live service game means they're not going to spend any money on battle passes or skins. If a live service game wants to survive, it has to evenly balance the frustration of losing across its player base. That way, everyone, ideally, gets to experience as many wins as they experience losses. Armed with that knowledge, we can conclude that the reason our games feel so lopsided has to be at least partially caused by our own play. But when we look at our gameplay, we might not see any issues. We are dealing lots of damage, healing a lot, and not dying. What more can we do? The answer is pressure. When your support fails to heal you, it's not necessarily because they dislike you, or because they are outstandingly bad at the game. It could be that they were under a lot of pressure. For example, pressure to heal the rest of your team because they're also taking a lot of damage. Or maybe pressure to die because they just got hit by a stray Hanzo arrow and peeking to heal you could kill them. When your tank doesn't push up, it's also not necessarily because they are bad players who don't understand what their job is. They might just get discorded the moment they drop their shield, or get hit by hundreds of shots as soon as they turn the corner. Maybe they are forced to use their defensive tools very early in a fight because the amount of damage they take is just too much to bear. And if your DPS is failing to get any picks and dies constantly even though you are actively pumping heals into them, maybe it's because they can't peek, or else they'll get headshot by a Widowmaker. Or maybe the damage they take is simply too high to be healed up. So now that we have a different perspective, instead of thinking of our teammates as inherently bad players, we think of them as regular players who are in a very difficult situation. How can we help them out? By applying counter pressure. Pressure is a lot like a game of tug of war. The less pressure is applied on the enemy team, the more pressure they are able to apply themselves. On the other hand, if the enemy team is under a lot of pressure, that prevents them from applying pressure to our team. In order to discord our tank, the enemy Zenyatta has to peek. To kill our DPS, the enemy Widowmaker has to peek the corner and take the shot. So ask yourself, which players on the enemy team are causing issues? Maybe the enemy Genji is tearing through your backline, or the enemy tank is just completely unkillable because he gets pumped full of heals and our DPS are pressured by an enemy Widow. We have to identify these sources of pressure and figure out a way to apply counter pressure. So let's take a look at some examples. Maybe you play Soldier 76 and you are dealing twice as much damage as the other DPS on your team. This could be caused by you just being significantly better than the other DPS, but maybe all that damage you deal comes from you spamming shots into the enemy tank that lead to nowhere and simply get healed up by the enemy supports. What if, instead of dealing 1,000 damage to the enemy D.Va that gets healed up right away, we hit a single Helix rocket on the enemy Ana, forcing her to hide and regenerate lest she risk being finished off? By applying pressure with just a single Helix rocket, we cut off the healing supply for the enemy tank, forcing them to play less aggressive. Or maybe the enemy Widow is wreaking havoc, getting pick after pick. Instead of just holding down left click on our team, we have to look for kunai headshots on her. No amount of healing is going to save your teammates from getting one-shot by a Widowmaker. but a single kunai headshot to her face may potentially force her out of the fight for some time, alleviating pressure from your team, allowing them to push in aggressively and win a 5v4 while the enemy Widowmaker is out of action. As you can see, Overwatch is not a game about getting tens of thousands in damage or healing by holding left click on tanks. It's about applying as much pressure as possible to put up a fight. Have you ever played against a Smurf Tracer who made you feel like you can't even leave spawn without dying? That's an example of a high-level player abusing the amount of pressure they can apply. If your supports aren't healing you while you're tanking, throw your Sigma shield in the face of the enemy Widow, or turn around and try to throw your rock at that Genji trying to kill your backline. Don't play on autopilot. Think about sources of pressure on the enemy team and look for ways to apply pressure yourself. Finding these opportunities is how high-level players can make even the worst teammates in existence look really good. And if your teammates look like really bad players, maybe the problem is that you haven't applied much pressure yourself, leaving them to carry that burden alone, preventing them from doing anything useful. A little anecdote here. A good example of this is that certain streamers like to take players who are, for example, in gold and say that they deserve to be a higher rank and place them into custom game scrims of that higher rank. So you have 9 GMs, for example, and 1 gold player. And whenever the gold player loses, he likes to say that his teammates underperformed because the enemy team's players have much better stats. But then once the gold player gets put on the other team, all of a sudden his former teammates perform very well, and his teammates start to perform very poorly, because that reduction in pressure by replacing a GM with a gold player is very significant. There we go. I hope this guide about pressure helped you gain a new perspective on why your teammates might look like they're underperforming and what specific steps you can take to try and make their lives a bit easier. If you enjoyed this guide and want to learn more about Overwatch 2, subscribe to this channel and leave a like or comment. If you are interested in improving even faster, check out my coaching services on iostux.com or head over to my Discord server to ask me questions in my #AskStuxAnything channel. My name is iostux, and I'd like to thank you for learning.